Hi. So we're talking about Dune now. It's the Dune-assance. I just like what a great title for a book. Like, dude, like, this is such a great word. I saw the terrible David Lynch movie, which I actually mostly blocked out of my memory. I kept looking for the part in the book. It's like, when does Sting show up? Was not going to read Dune before this new movie came out, but then it got delayed, and now I was like, I'm going to finish this book. And I did. This will be a spoiler review, by the way. I'm going to mention everything that's happening in this book. There's definitely influences of Foundation in here, but I am fascinated how much this book Star Wars copied, because you have the desert planet, the Chosen One, you have big mouths in the desert, like the Sarlacc pit, right? Also, Jabba the Hutt, what's one of the trades he deals in? Spice. Come on, George. The book begins in a way that's like very fascinating. You know, the gom jabber scene with the Reverend Mother, it's very famous. Everybody knows about it. If you don't, like, well, you're probably like just a normal person. We're all nerds. The Bene Gesserit are like a secret, well, not secret, they're basically the Jedi. Woman-only Jedi, and they have like a power called the Voice, not the one on TV. Christina Aguilera and Kelly Clarkson, actually members of the Bene Gesserit, as it turns out. That's what the new show about the Bene Gesserit is going to be on HBO Max. How Christina Aguilera and Kelly Clarkson are actually space witches who are manipulating all of society. Looking forward to that. Frank Herbert invested so much thought into this story, and it captures your imagination. Like, I want to know more about what's going on in this world. This is definitely just a subset of a much larger, big civilization that we don't really get to see. When I was done, I was like, what do other people think? And like, a lot of people think that Frank Herbert is a bad writer, which I was very surprised by. He has a totally omniscient writing style in which you move from character to character. One paragraph can be Paul thinking, and then you get the internal thoughts of Jessica. It's not how a lot of things are written. Most are like, you know, you have your page break and you know that you're switching character perspective. He doesn't do that. I think his writing style is very poetic. Everything about the characters themselves is very internal. I think that's part of why I like this book, and I think that's why some people might think it's boring. The characters are very preoccupied with the greater implications of what every action they take is, which is how I think, unfortunately. Like, every decision I make, I think, how is this going to affect the universe or my life? And that's definitely how these characters think. There's something, like, exploding behind them, and they're thinking, like, what does this mean for the universe, right? Like, I love it. You can tell Frank Herbert is a very introspective author. He researched and presents the ecology of the planet of Dune so extensively. So much of the book is preoccupied, and which Frank Herbert himself was preoccupied with, the environment and environmentalism. The characters, like, are almost secondary to, like, the themes. This book is, you almost feel like you're in a dream. The inner thoughts of these characters is the story. There's like a introspective, like, and poetic nature to this whole book. It's almost like a sonnet. I don't like, or like a grand, like an epic poem. I would not say that this is like hard science fiction. This is definitely space opera, but it's like philosophical space opera, because you're not supposed to really care about like Paul, like, he's fine. I don't care. I kind of like Jessica, which Jessica has a much bigger role in this book than I realized. Like, Jessica is a concubine, but she never was, like, the wife of Leto Atreides, the Duke, Paul's father. Because of that, she always felt somewhat inferior, but she knew it was for the best. Paul, like, for, like, kind of, like, the first parts of the book, like, there's not a lot going on with him. We don't get his perspective that much. A lot of it's about Jessica, and we get to know the Duke really well, and then the Duke dies. There is like a small streak of maybe like, so the Baron, he's a little bit of a character of a villain. He's kind of just like telling you his plans right away, which was like fine. Like, but the first scene with him, he's already revealing his whole plans, and I'm like, oh wow, this is happening pretty fast, because this is a pretty long book, and like already we know that the Baron isn't giving up his hold on Dune. He is going to try and take it from the Atreides. The spice is very valuable. In Dune, the spice is the thing that like drives all of civilization. You can't travel faster than light without spice. Dune is the most important planet, so it's an epic story. It's like the inverse of Star Wars, an epic story that only takes place on this planet. Paul is like some chosen one in like a religious sense, but you find out in this book that all religion is fake, just like real life, by the way. The Fremen, which are the people of Dune, or Arrakis. You know, he must have come up with Atreides and Arrakis like in the same like day. It's a little similar. The Fremen, they have a religious belief in a messiah, but you find out that like that belief was like planted thousands of years ago by the Bene Gesserit so that like someday the right circumstances would emerge where Paul would exist and then like take over. So they're the ones pulling all the strings, which is why so to move into like the kind of problematic, maybe white savior aspect of the story that I see people talking about, the optics of it like aren't really good from that perspective. Paul is not like a perfect character. He is a messiah for the Fremen people who are kind of like based on Arabic society. All of these people are like pawns in like the scheme of the Bene Gesserit, because what happens is that Jessica, at some point, she's talking to Chani/Zendaya. Zendaya or Zendaya? Chani. We'll just say Chani. We'll use her actual character's name. So Paul loves Zendaya, and Jessica is like saying like, follow your heart. Like, because like Paul is aware that the reason why he exists is because of manipulation, because of Jessica. There is like a scene in it here where he realizes that Jessica is his enemy. He loves her, but he says like, she's my enemy. I kept expecting like there to be some kind of conflict between him and Jessica that doesn't really materialize. Maybe it happens later. Paul he becomes one of the Fremen, which I guess is like what happens in Dances with Wolves. What happens though is he convinces them that he is their god, because like that's the path the Bene Gesserit have already laid the groundwork for by creating all this fake stuff that everyone believes in. And then at the end, Paul's feats are so grand and he elevates the Fremen so much, they talk about how they're going to tell stories of what he did and that they are going to embellish it so that he will seem more powerful. And so, I mean, I don't know Frank Herbert. He's dead. RSVP. I don't think he was trying to dissect the notion of a white savior, but he was definitely trying to critique the whole trope of like a chosen one and how dangerous that can be. Because now like there's a potential for the Fremen to become like an unstoppable force of destruction, and that's like the jihad. It's the visions that Paul is having throughout, that he could be the catalyst for all these terrible things to happen. He's aware that he is dangerous, but he doesn't quite know how. And then in the end, instead of staying with the person he loves, he decides to marry the Princess Irulan, and he's going to keep Chani as like his concubine. And he says like, I'm going to actually love you and not love this like, you know, this new who's also Bene Gesserit. And like Chani's like, okay. And then Jessica for some reason is like, oh, that's great. But it's like, wait, Jessica, weren't you like saying like he should do what he wants? At the end, things got a little confused. Like Jessica's just like all on board with it. But you know, like we all have those moms who are reflexively supportive. There is like elements of like the white savior trope in here. But if you read all the way to the end, it's not all positive. It's almost more fitting that this character is white, because it's like, look at this white person, like just using everybody. They're all victims of the manipulations of the Bene Gesserit and the Baron. Even Paul is in some ways a victim, because he is the culmination of like a genetic destiny created by these people and influenced by Jessica. Like their plan doesn't go quite the way they think it's going to, because Paul doesn't do what they expect. It's not really like a happy ending for everybody. It's very bittersweet. Like everyone loses agency in the world. Everyone kind of becomes locked in this other state that no one really wants. I'd say the biggest themes of these book that are present throughout, it's skeptical of organized religion, it's skeptical of just organizations like institutions in general, and how these institutions are concerned mostly with power and money. They will go into other cultures and they will devastate them and like enslave them just to expand that power and money. Not just society, but the environment, because Dune could be a gorgeous, beautiful planet. It could be a lush place for the people who live there. But no one wants that, because people want the spice. The spice is what's important. Some other stuff about this. So if you read Foundation, treatment of women is kind of weird. There's like no women in that story. Lots of women in Dune. It's all couched in like in the power dynamics of royal houses and everything. So there is something a little bit archaic feeling, like, or old fashioned. But like, you know, the Bene Gesserit are also like an all women organization. It's fairly modern. There are some things in other older books that I've read where they say things like women should be in the kitchen. You don't get that sense from this book. So a criticism I've seen of the story and the characters being stupid and not realizing what's happening, because there is a betrayal that occurs. Some people are very upset that like no one can see this betrayal coming. So Dr. Yue betrays them, but he is from a group of people who are conditioned to be completely loyal. It's like an element of world building. They say it throughout, and some people think this is a cop-out, that it's like, how could they not have known that he had been deconditioned? I think it's like unfair to critique the story of, is like, well, that's not what I would do. And it's like, well, you're not in the book. You know what? We're all going to be dead in a few decades from global warming, and here I am making like a YouTube video. That doesn't make sense either. Just like Dune. Dune is real life. And that's part of why I think that Dune is so interesting now, is because like a lot of the themes still felt relevant. The society of Dune is like imperialist, kind of resembles like what America's heading, right? Some kind of oligarchy where people who are very wealthy and rich and powerful control everything. And then, you know, the Fremen are just like, you know, the what's going to happen to the middle class people. And then there's the environmental aspect, which has nearly never stopped being relevant. And it just made me appreciate Frank Herbert and how just, I think he was very like in touch with modern issues that are still, they're actually the most important issues today, even if we're not talking about them. The environment is the most important issue. I love this book. I think it's so good. The one problem I kind of really had with it was people say like it takes like until about halfway to get going. But I kind of thought like once the books started being more action focused, I thought it got like a little boring. I mean, it wasn't boring. I like whipped through it, but it just wasn't as interesting to me as all the maneuvering and all the internal thought processes. When there's a lot of action going on, it is kind of a little weird for people to like not be in the moment, but to be like so introspective. Maybe that's how Frank Herbert was. Maybe like, you know, he's the kind of guy who would get in a car accident and still be thinking about like deforestation in Brazil. Sounds like it could be him based on reading this book. I just felt like I was in Frank Herbert's head. Like, this is just an artist who had something to say. And I think that's so important, and so much literature out there right now is like just what people think they can sell. I saw some review of Dune where they're like, let's rate the world building, let's rate the characters. And I'm like, but what about the book? Like, shouldn't we rate the book overall? Like, I think having a weird system to judge art that has categories and whatever is insane. I've heard some people say that it felt like with this book that Frank Herbert just had these ideas and wanted to use his book as a way to convey them. It was weird that this was presented as like some kind of weird alternative to how a book should be. A book can be just like plot driven, but like this feels like it has like it has a didactic function. It wants to teach you about more than just the world that it exists in. This is not about learning about Arrakis. This is about learning about real life. Just like some of the stuff he wrote in here, like, think of all those experiences, the wisdom they'd bring. But wisdom tempers love, doesn't it? And it puts a new shape on hate. How can you tell what's ruthless unless you've plumbed the depths of both cruelty and kindness? Ugh, there's so many great lines in this book. I felt like Frank Herbert was with me. That's why this is amazing. I feel very close to this person. It's amazing. It's a great book. Everyone should read it. You know, I was going to give it 4.5 stars, but as I talk about it, I think it's just going to upgrade it to 5 stars because, yeah, it has some problems, but there's just something about feeling like you read something that is so considered. Something like this is what literature should be. Like, you should feel like the author is there. It's good. You should read it.